Cap Times Idea Fest 2020 is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors. Presenting sponsor, the Burrish Group at UBS, a financial services firm with global access and a local focus to pursue what matters most for its clients. Major sponsors are HealthX Ventures, backing entrepreneurs who are creating value with digital health solutions. Exact Sciences, pursuing earlier detections and life-changing answers in the fight against cancer. Quartz, health plans built with you in mind. And Madison Gas and Electric, your community energy company whose goal is net zero carbon electricity by 2050. Co-sponsors are Epic Systems and the Godfrey Kahn Law Firm. Other sponsors are Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, Home Savings Bank, Unity Point Health Meritor, Cargo Coffee, and the Forward Theater Company. Media partners are the Wisconsin State Journal and Madison.com, WKOW Channel 27, and Hinckley Productions. Please consider becoming a Cap Times member. Learn more at membership.captimes.com.
Hi, I'm Chelsea DeCane-Jarabic, audience strategist for the Cap Times, and I'd like to welcome you to this year's Cap Times Idea Fest. This is our 4th annual event, but for the first time, we're presenting the festival virtually. Our theme this year is 2020 Changes Everything. With the COVID-19 pandemic, its effect on the health, education, and economic well-being of our community, as well as the calls for change from the Black Lives Matter movement, there is a lot to talk about. This year's lineup is our best yet. We believe Idea Fest has grown into a signature event on the Madison calendar. It is also an important showcase for the Cap Times, our locally owned and century-old news publication. If you're not already, we hope you'll consider becoming a Cap Times member. As a member, you'll have access to special Idea Fest programs, plus benefits throughout the year. You'll also be supporting an independent and trustworthy local media source at a critical time. Find the details online at membership.captimes.com. I'd like to thank the Burrish Group at UBS, which is the presenting sponsor of Idea Fest and has been with us since the start, as well as our other numerous sponsors. So please, enjoy this session of Idea Fest. Thank you and welcome.
Hello, I am Cap Times food editor Lindsay Christians, and this is Cap Times Idea Fest. First of all, I want to say thank you to everybody who's here today. We've got 2 chefs here in this studio space, and we've got 1 guest coming in to us from New York. So I'm going to just really quick read everybody's bios so you have a sense of who's here with us, and then we'll get started. So first of all, a Madison native, Francesca Hong, is a chef and co-owner of Morris Ramen. She trained at some of the city's most beloved restaurants, including Gray's, Restaurant Magnus, Osteria Papavero, and 43 North, where she was the executive chef. Hong co-founded the Culinary Ladies Collective and Cook It Forward, which connects restaurants with nonprofits to help address food insecurity. She is Democratic candidate for the Assembly District 76 seat in downtown Madison. Welcome, Francesca.
Thank you so much for having me.
Dave Heide, here on my right, is a Madison area chef with more than 20 years of experience. He is the owner, operator, and executive chef at Liliana's in Fitchburg, Charlie's on Main in Oregon, and the forthcoming Little John's. He and his restaurants have won multiple local accolades, but Heide is also well known for his dedication to philanthropy, including projects to help address food waste, increase food accessibility, and support local farms. And Ashley Kosiak is the Impact Program Manager at the James Beard Foundation, where she manages education and advocacy programs that promote a more sustainable food system. She received a master's degree in food studies from New York University and has been working with chefs and culinary professionals on food policy ever since. All right, so I am really hoping today to have a lively and provocative discussion. We're going to talk about some things that are challenging and hopefully build to an optimistic note. So that's the plan for today, that's the format. If there is something that you want to address that I've asked to someone else, just feel free to jump in after that. So one of the things that we've been hearing is that the pandemic exacerbated problems in the restaurant industry that already were there, that it sort of amplified everything that was already challenging. Dave, this week you made the really difficult decision to close Charlie's on Main in Oregon. And I wonder if you can speak to some of the challenges in the farm-to-table independent restaurant business model, even pre-COVID.
Sure. I think one of the biggest struggles has really turned into the fact that we've gotten on thinner and thinner and thinner margins, and I think that's across the restaurant industry, not just farm to table, but across the industry. I think Wisconsin Restaurant Association has it at 3% profit margin if you're lucky, not including the owner's salary. So, that's already a super tight margin. We also have kind of built into our plan underpaid employees, and it's really hard to change that and pay more if everyone else is paying less. So like a server is $2.33 an hour is what the wages that we are required to pay them, because we rely on tips from the consumer to pay for that. But that also creates a huge divide between the front of house and back of house. So we have the front of house making large amounts of money for short periods of time, and the back of house working many hours for less money because there's just not any to go around. And I think every chef owner knows, like, we would love to pay our staff triple what we are, but there's literally no room for both. I don't know one restaurateur that's a local independent restaurateur that is like, my God, this is such an easy life. Like, I am just like, I am relaxing. I've got my 3 Lexuses at home, and I'm trying to pick which one to drive to work. And I'm in my 28 car garage. Like, I don't think that's true. I think if you ask any local, farm centric chef operator, they're going to be on their 75th hour of work for the week, and trying to decide if it's next week or the week after they'll be able to pull enough money from the account to pay their mortgage for their family. So I think it was already a super tight margin system. And I think there's a lot of community support in those small restaurants as well. So we are always trying to give back and help both our staff and the community that we're in and that we serve. And I think this definitely has gotten a lot worse because of COVID, because all those things just got tenfold. When you go from, Charlie's, for instance, we went from doing about $23,000 a week in sales to about $3,000 a week in sales the last 2 weeks. How do you even, you can't cut anything anymore, you're down to you're past cutting anything anymore, So, and I think there's definitely a big drag now of everyone getting burned out. People are just done with COVID, and I think for dining out in particular, I think people use dining out as entertainment. They don't use it as for getting food, So when you eliminate the fun part of dining out, which is conversations with friends and having cocktails with people and all those wonderful things that we loved about dining out, when you eliminate that, then dining out becomes an obligation instead of an enjoyment. So,
yeah. Francesca, this past spring, you decided to run for assembly in part because of the effects you were seeing of the pandemic on some of your coworkers, your colleagues, your staff. Why are restaurant workers so vulnerable?
I think there are a couple things we have to look at. One is that the restaurant industry as a whole has very few barriers to attain some of those jobs. So you're looking at folks who are oftentimes don't have a ton of, are already coming from vulnerable situations. You're looking at workers who are doing hourly jobs, which don't come with a lot of benefits because they're not required to, employers are not incentivized to require benefits for hourly workers. You're looking at folks who may not have proper documentation that makes them more vulnerable to really a lot of unjust working environments. And a lot of the times, part of the more special parts that I think about the industry is that, there are the folks who don't always feel like they fit in other places, and yet you find a home in the restaurant industry because we are very accepting of folks who may be thinking creatively and outside of the box. And so I think, there are structural reasons as to why restaurant workers are vulnerable. There's also cultural reasons. And I think right now with COVID and seeing what happened and seeing all the inequities that really do exist in our industry, as David mentioned before, people are getting burned out, and the industry itself, I think, is burning. And I still see opportunities for us to rebuild. And I think in order to do that, though, we need a collective effort of the community and the industry. It has to come from the diners, it has to come from the workers, and most importantly, it has to come from policymakers. So I decided to run because I knew that a lot of the problems we're dealing with in the industry and the way that people are now reimagining how the industry can be a more equitable place, a place that can be about joy, all of that comes with dining out, we can attain that and still create equitable workplaces that promote teamwork and democracy and more egalitarian mindsets. I think all that is possible in the restaurant industry, but we can't get there unless it's a collective effort. And so, and we have to center workers in the conversation. For too long, it's been about the chef. For too long, it's been about the owners. It has not been about the experiences and the stories of servers, of cooks, of dishwashers, of folks who are working day in and day out, sometimes who don't want to be seen, but their stories still matter. So, and I think that idea is very relevant to where we are in society outside of the industry too. So I decided to run because I think there's so many parallels between what we need in the industry and what our policies should look like as well.
Yeah. Ashley, I was hoping that you could speak a little bit to some of the news that we've seen coming out of the James Beard Foundation over the past 4 to 6 months. The foundation decided not to give full awards this year, but is honoring nominees tomorrow night, I think, the night after we're taping this. The food world, like many industries, has been dominated by cisgender white men. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the industry's most stark inequities that you've seen.
Yeah, so I want to start by first, saying how admirable it is that Chef Francesca, you're running for office. I think that's amazing, and thank you for doing that. We need more people like you running for office at every level, all across the country. So thank you for doing that. And yes, so the Beard Foundation has been in the news a fair bit recently, mostly around the awards. Ultimately our decision to not hand out the full awards, there will still be an award ceremony tomorrow night, Friday, September 25th. It will, honor all of the nominees. It will honor the folks, the award winners that have already been named, including Lifetime Achievement, Humanitarian of the Year. These are very important awards. But ultimately, the decision not to hand out our awards this year was informed by several factors, but ultimately it was the idea that the assignment of winners and non-winners seems very much at odds with efforts to bring the community together to shape a stronger and more equitable future for the independent restaurant industry. As Chef Dave said, restaurants across the country are hurting right now. We heard from some nominees who opted to remove their name from the process that they didn't feel comfortable being nominated for potentially an accepting an award when they had furloughed or laid off 2/3 of their staff. So it was several things that came to that decision, but most of it was just, it wasn't really the best way to meet the moment, I think. And, actually at tomorrow night's ceremony, there will be conversation with chefs from across the country about equity in the restaurant industry. And so I can speak a little bit to that, but I would certainly encourage everyone to tune into the awards. It'll be on Twitter, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, Friday, September 25th, because the chefs will be speaking to it. I'm a cisgender white woman. The experience that I have in the restaurant industry is not the same as Black, Indigenous people of color, if you're non-binary. So I would encourage folks to tune in to hear those perspectives and to hear that conversation. But it's not surprising, as Chef Francesca said, the restaurants attract a lot of different people to the communities and to the areas, to the restaurant industry. But the bottom line is, based on a study from the Restaurant Opportunity Center, workers of color access living wage at fine dining occupations only 73% of the time, compared with equally qualified white workers. And workers of color earn 56% less income on average compared to equally qualified white workers. And that disparity is not acceptable. So I think we're all hoping and working to change that.
All right, thank you. Dave, I think the last time I interviewed you for a story, it was about delivery companies and some of the predatory practices that we've seen from like Grubhub and DoorDash and similar companies like that. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the margins around delivery and basically the challenges of relying on takeout and delivery when you're working with some of these kinds of companies.
I think the hardest thing has actually changed a lot since COVID, which is it's the only time we get any kind of connection with our customers is when we get it handed off. And when you use Eat Street and DoorDash, and I mean, you pick one, Grubhub, pick one of the 38 delivery companies out there that are doing it. When you work with any of them, you have no idea who the person is that's picking it up. You've done no training with them. There's nothing holding them accountable for being polite or kind and I think the best description for our industry is not the restaurant industry, it's the service industry, and we're all about providing a service to people and being there to like engage with our people and having that personality part. And I think one of the problems with a lot of those now is not just the predatory behavior, but it's also the fact that the training that they do is much more the same you'd get from like a cab driver or a UPS driver, where they don't need to have that personal engagement. So most of the critique we get and most of the negative feedback we have right now from delivery food is actually from the personality of the person delivering it. You know, it's like they're gruff, they smell like cigarette smoke, they show up, they kind of like throw the package on the front step and like walk away, and they've already got their tip guaranteed and, you know, in digital format. So, but you know, there's also like when you're already at a 3% profit margin, and some of these places originally were doing what, like 30% they charged for a delivery fee. So you had two options. You could either add the 30% onto your ticket price, but now you're charging your customer, you become non-competitive. You had 30% onto a $20 dish, and all of a sudden, there's no way someone's ordering delivery from you. Or, you know, you eat it, and then you're basically paying a customer 27% to, you know, eat your food. So, but then you're also at a point too, where especially with COVID, with people not wanting to go out to eat, you either keep them as a customer by paying them to eat your food, or you lose them as a customer forever because they find someone else who does deliver and is willing to do it. And I think kind of what you were saying earlier, which is like all the things that are in our industry now kind of force us to be overly competitive with each other instead of being able to kind of like work together, you know, like so one of the things that we're switching out, we were originally going to do it in August, but that's because we thought we were going to be able to open up our dining room in August, but I was so dumb thinking that would ever happen. But what we're doing is we're actually changing over our pay structure for all of our employees. So, you know, for so long it's been all the tips that come in only stay in the front of house, nothing goes to the back of house. There's a huge discrepancy in pay between the servers and bartenders and cooks. So we're actually changing all of our wages for all of our staff. If you're a regular hourly employee and not a manager, you make $13 an hour. And if you're a manager, you make $15 an hour because there are extra responsibilities for you. And then we charge a 20% service charge to every single bill that comes in once we open up. And of that 20%, 10% gets equally distributed among the entire staff, and the other 10% goes towards the increased cost to the restaurant that the higher living wage does. But now you've made it so the cooks actually, so one of the things that happens in kitchens too is because there's this wage discrepancy between front and back, when the front of house is getting killed and busy, the back of house is like, I'm getting the same hourly wage and my tips don't matter. So when a server comes back and is like, man, I need this on the fly, like I need a remake, the kitchen's like, I'll get to it when I get to it. And there's a little bit of a disconnect between the two, and it becomes not in our restaurants, but definitely a lot of restaurants I've worked at, there's a lot of combativeness between the front and the back because of that wage discrepancy. So by having everyone be an equal share, equal partner, it means that the cooks are just as excited about having a great customer experience as the front of house is. So, yeah. And it means we have some extra working capital to hopefully add things that most people in our industry just can't afford to do, like health insurance and dental and life insurance and 401k. And it's not to say that no restaurants in Madison do that, but I would say like just pulling a number out of my area, I would say that see, look how good I did on camera. But just pulling a number out, I'd say maybe 5% of the restaurants in Madison offer full benefits for their staff. So it feels right. It feels like a right statistic, but I can't quote me.
I think for a long time, and I agree completely with Dave on this, there has not been a collaborative and cooperative approach between restaurants, even independent restaurants where we have being local in common. I think there are a couple drivers of that. The fact that we're all hustling and trying to make ends meet. Being kind of, there's structural issues here. Most of us, especially in the downtown area, pay exorbitant rents. There are just a lot of factors that keep us apart and keep us all in our own lanes. And I just think that moving forward, that's not the way that our industry is going to survive. And within every independent restaurant, that mentality is there too, that everyone has their lane. And what that's done is that it's created divisiveness between different sectors when our common goal really is to provide an amazing service to the folks that enter into our homes. Our restaurants are our homes. Our restaurants are a place that we cultivate, folks. I hope a lot of the leadership in restaurants are cultivating other leadership and development within their employees. Restaurants are these magical spaces that not only foster growth in other people, but we're third sector spaces for people to come in and escape. And we can still, I think, achieve that, but we have to get out of this mentality that everyone stay in their lane. That divisive rhetoric, that's the thing that seems to be universal right now, is that everyone stay in their lane, and that's not democratic. That's not what restaurants should be about. And it makes me really excited to hear that people like Dave and our restaurant as well, and I'm seeing this across, kind of trickle down, where we are actually collaborating by changing our the systems that are at play. We are listening to one another and checking in on different group pages about, how are you able to eliminate tipping? How are you implementing, what are we doing on social justice stances? And I think that the fact that we want each other's opinion on these types of decisions is already showing that it's not strategic for any of us to stay in our lanes. It's about working together now.
Yeah. Thank you. Ashley, I was wondering if you could maybe speak to some of the different maybe business structures that you're seeing restaurants maybe come up with as ways of being more sustainable looking forward. And I don't know if you want to speak to some of the challenges around tipping and why tipping is problematic, as devoted as we are as diners to it, because diners love the tipping model. And I know that there have been restaurants across this country that have tried to change it with varying degrees of success. But I wonder if you can speak to maybe some of the business models that seem promising to you.
Yeah, so some of the business models that we've heard from chefs and restaurants across the country that seem to be working for them to various degrees, is there's been, so much pivoting, that word. If I never hear that word after 2020, I'll be so happy. There's been so much pivoting done in 2020. So we're seeing more and more restaurants, for a while everybody had to go with to-go and takeout. We've seen some restaurants have some success with some, value-added products, whether it's jams or hummuses or whatever it is that their restaurant might specialize in, being able to market and sell that. One really creative thing that I've heard that I thought was really cool was meal boxes. So restaurants providing, meal boxes that, customers can pick up and go take at home. And it's not just the meal box. A lot of the chefs, if they have a comfort and charisma and talent for the camera, they're doing sort of like cook along with the cooking box on their Facebook feed or on their Instagram channel, so that it's, the customers can kind of cook along based on what is in their meal kit. We've of course also seen, those are just some sort of additional features that chefs are trying to add on in order to help make the already very slim profit margins a little bit more realistic. Expanding outdoor dining, really concerned about the winter, looking at creative solutions for outdoor dinings. I have talked a lot about yurts in the past month, as some folks look to that as a feature to expand the outdoor dining experience, but also changing the staff models. I think we've seen a lot more cross training of staff. So, training front of house folks to do back of house work, back of house folks to do front of house work. And, there's a couple of reasons for that. Some are that I know restaurants that some, as they reopen, want to rehire folks based on how long they've been with them versus who they necessarily need. So, if you have a back of house person that's been with you for a long time, but you really need someone to do some front of house work, offering to cross train them on that so that you can really bring back your staff who's been really loyal to you. And of course, there's tipping, there's gratuity included. And I think I hope that more and more restaurants are exploring a service included model. I know for a lot of folks, it's difficult. It's perceived as difficult, but it's evidence that for some it really does work. So really exploring what that service included model looks like, and there are really wonderful resources on how to make that work. Like I mentioned ROC before, the Restaurant Opportunity Center. I know they offer a lot of information on that. So understanding it's perceived as being very difficult, and it is very difficult, but it's certainly worth doing right now because the tip wages are just they're just not working for a lot of people.
Yeah. I feel like there's a natural segue there to the nom 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 box, which was on my sort of list of questions that I wanted to ask you, Dave. So you've started a meal kit like this in collaboration with some other local chefs. Can you talk about how that project came about, why you wanted to do it, and maybe how it's evolved?
Yeah, it's been really great. So when all this hit, so I think one of the things that's really important to know, first off, overall, is that restaurants do more than just support themselves. Restaurants support an indefinite amount of other businesses down the chain. So, you think about the farmers, you think about the like Cintas, all the different companies that are all around supporting a restaurant, and how all of them are all flailing because of the restaurant industry. So it's not just the restaurant industry that's in trouble. For me, the biggest one was my farmers. We have a ton of different farmers that we work with throughout the year. And we were calling them, and all of them had already seeded and planted and ordered and prepped for a normal season, and now they had what are you going to do with 17 tons of rutabaga? What are you going to do with all that celeriac? It's not a regular consumer thing. Watermelon radishes, they aren't things that you can just sell to a local grocery store. What are you going to do with all that excess product? And for the local meat farmers, how do they do it when a lot of them, their main distribution model was through restaurants? We buy 200 pounds of ground beef at a time, and selling that direct to consumer, like at a farmer's market, with all the farmer's market shutdowns, what do they do? So we started these nom 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 kits, and the idea is we support local farms by buying 100% of the product from local farms and local producers, and then we work with a local chef in town, and we film cooking the dish with them, and we make the food with them, and then we give them a recipe, and all the ingredients come just like they would be in a box, but just like you get them from the farmer's market. So whole ingredients, whole vegetables. So it's just like you went to the farmer's market. So you get that feeling of supporting that farmer, seeing it in that original idea, and then cooking along with the chefs. And it's been great. I will say, our first series, speaking about the difference in chefs, our first series was 100% all cis white males, and it was me and a bunch of local amazing chefs. And then so we listened to all the feedback, and we mixed it up a ton this time. So I'm the only cis white native male in this series. So we have Shinji Muramoto, and we've got Jamie Hong, and we've got a bunch of great people. We got Lauren Montalbano. We've had a bunch of wonderful people, but one of the biggest struggles we've had with it is just this burnout. People feel like they've been doing this COVID thing long enough that they're just burnt out, and they're tired, and they're exhausted. And even though we had so much support, we sold out of every single box for our first series, and that was over 200 boxes of every single one.
Wow.
And then this series, the most we've sold was 80.
Okay.
And we've had more press on it, more social media shares. We've had more people saying oh my God, this is my favorite thing ever. And so I think a lot of it is just burnout of people just being I'm just tired. And I think there's a lot of I'll just call it depression. I think there's a lot of people who are just depressed, and they don't want to cook, and they don't want to do anything, and they just want to do whatever they can to get by and get through it. And I think there's also a lot of burnout in supporting restaurants. People feel but I've already done the thing. Like I've already been supporting
Yeah.
you for so long. I was talking to Tori Miller when he came for our Nom Nom Kit, and we were cooking together, and he was like, yeah, man, like you think about it, and supporting the fine dining restaurant scene in Madison, there's probably only like 5,000 people who actively support us, and now they're stretched out among trying to save their like 50 favorite restaurants, and like the numbers just don't add up, like there's only so much saving they can do, and people who were ordering every week are still ordering from us, but they're ordering once a month. So anyway, I could go on to that for a long time.
Yeah. Well, I think we could take a quick break here, if that works for everyone. We're going to have a message from our wonderful sponsors, and we'll be back in a few minutes.
Cap Times Idea Fest 2020 is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors. Presenting sponsor, the Burrish Group at UBS, a financial services firm with global access and a local focus to pursue what matters most for its clients. Major sponsors are HealthX Ventures, backing entrepreneurs who are creating value with digital health solutions. Exact Sciences, pursuing earlier detections and life-changing answers in the fight against cancer. Quartz, health plans built with you in mind. And Madison Gas and Electric, your community energy company whose goal is net zero carbon electricity by 2050. Co-sponsors are Epic Systems and the Godfrey Kahn Law Firm. Other sponsors are Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, Home Savings Bank, Unity Point Health Meritor, Cargo Coffee, and the Forward Theater Company. Media partners are the Wisconsin State Journal and Madison.com, WKOW Channel 27, and Hinckley Productions. Please consider becoming a Cap Times member. Learn more at membership.captimes.com.
Welcome back. I found this quote in Eater recently, and I really liked it, and I think it's what I want to use to sort of introduce this second half. Regarding the pandemic and the increased scrutiny of restaurant culture with the rise of Black Lives Matter, the term reckoning has been bandied about in response to these intertwined awakenings, but this is just the beginning. To some, it's an opportunity. The restaurant industry's precarious position, one where survival is not guaranteed, places it in a position to actively imagine the terms of its own rebirth. So, Ashley, I actually was wanting to hear from you first about the Beard Foundation has been doing a ton of webinars with chefs all over the country. What is the Restaurants Act, and why is it important right now?
Well, the Restaurants Act, it's one of my favorite topics. So the Restaurants Act is a bill that was introduced first in the House by Congressman Earl Blumenauer. It's also been introduced in the Senate. It now has 200 co-sponsors in the House, and I think close to 50 in the Senate. So it looks really good. And what it is, it's a $120 billion restaurant relief fund. It does sound like a lot of money. That's because restaurants are in desperate need of support. They were some of the first people to shut down with this pandemic, and they will be some of the last people to open with this pandemic. There was the Paycheck Protection Program that came in the CARES Act. The Paycheck Protection Program didn't really help that many restaurants. It certainly helped some, and that's amazing for the businesses it did help. However, if you read news about the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, it was not a good program for many BIPOC businesses, including BIPOC-owned restaurants. These businesses that did not have traditional connections to the banks that were distributing this loan. So going back to the PPP, might work for some people, but it's not going to work for a lot of the restaurants. So that's why we're looking at a restaurant relief fund. Like I said, it's $120 billion. It would be a grant program for restaurants, for independent restaurants. So there are a limited number of business operations you could have and employees that you could have. And it's a great investment. It's a great investment in the country. 90 cents of every dollar a restaurant receives goes back into the economy. So you are not just supporting restaurants with the Restaurants Act, you're supporting farmers, you're supporting fishermen, you're supporting parking attendants, you're supporting all these other businesses that are tied to restaurants, not just in the food system, but in the wider community. So it's really important. And with the employment numbers as they are supporting restaurants, they estimate it could decrease the unemployment rate by almost 3%. I think it was like 2.6, 2.8%. So it'd be great for the economy, it'd be great for communities, it'd be great for restaurants and their employees. And it's a really important piece of legislation. So I encourage everyone, whether you're a chef, especially if you are a chef or restaurant owner, to call your member of Congress. Even if you're not, feel free to call your member of Congress. We're really happy to have Speaker Pelosi come out in favor of the restaurants bill, and we're really hoping to see some sort of restaurant relief fund included in the next relief or stimulus package that comes into the House.
And if I can interject, Senator Tammy Baldwin is a very big supporter of the Restaurants Act and a co-sponsor.
Nice.
Excellent. I love it.
Francesca, early in the pandemic, you turned Morris Ramen into a community kitchen that was serving food to out-of-work service industry folks, basically people who needed it. How did that evolve into Cook It Forward? Is there a path there?
Yeah, so Morris Ramen was one of the restaurants very fortunate to receive the PPP loan. And when we received it and we knew that we could retain all of our workers, we knew that there still wouldn't be enough work, especially because we were going into summer season. My restaurant serves hot soup, doesn't always add up great. We knew there wasn't going to be enough work, and we also knew that we would have to work harder to create an environment where people would feel safer and want to come to work. And I think it just kind of added up that we would create a model that allowed folks to be motivated and feel like they had more purpose during this pandemic. And so that's how we switched into community kitchen. And we retrained all of our staff, regardless of what you worked before. We were now one house. We've got servers and bartenders and managers who are now learning more knife skills, and everyone came together. It was very difficult. There was a lot of the constant communication and collaboration to make it work. But we started figuring out how we could make hundreds of meals out of our little space with the staff. And across the street, again, with folks being out of their lane, I'm going to go back to that. Our neighbors approached me about expanding community kitchen. And so Cook It Forward was founded by myself, Josh Berkson, and Patrick Sweeney at Rule Number 1. And then I have to give so much credit to Alnisa Allgood at Collab for Good, who really is continuing to help us center equity in the program. And this program is an end-to-end donor to distribution network where we look to uplift restaurants by purchasing meals from them, and then we work with local delivery, RE Golden Produce, to bring the meals to distribution sites. But from there, we also compensate last mile delivery drivers from primarily Black-owned and Black women-run organizations who have trusted relationships in the neighborhoods that they serve, and they also provide other resources to them, whether they be mental health resources and educational resources, to then bring and hire folks to be last mile delivery drivers to ensure that these meals are actually getting into the hands of those who are food insecure. And we're very proud and continuing to learn and evolve this project, and currently have about 9 restaurants participating. We were at around 550 meals a week. It's gone down due to funding, but again, I try not to look so much at the number of meals that we're producing, but more that, through restaurants and through working with amazing nonprofit organizations and under the umbrella of sharing resources, we've been able to center equity and really tackle multiple crises in our community by working together.
Thank you. That's actually a perfect segue to what Chef Dave is doing with Little John's, also addressing food insecurity. You've been working on this pay what you can model for a couple years now. I wonder if you can give us an update on where it's at and kind of give an overview of that project.
Yeah. So it's all changed so much. Originally the idea was we were going to start small and work our way big. So the main concept was we wanted to open up a pay what you can restaurant so that anyone could have access to healthy, nutritious food regardless of means. And we looked at it as how do we make that sustainable, because the margins are so small. So once you put pay what you can, there are 54 pay what you can restaurants throughout the United States, and all of them run on about 94 cents on the dollar profit. Well, if the average restaurant is only making a 3% profit, that means that you're never going to be profitable in that model. So I was like, okay, if I look at it from a for-profit model, if I look at the three major costs of operating a restaurant, where you have the operating expense of the building, you've got the labor cost, and you've got the food cost, I set out and I was like, hey, what if I could make all of them zero? So that was my original goal, was what if we can eliminate the building cost, the labor cost, and the food cost? That'd be awesome. Now I knew I was never gonna get that, but that was my idea. And so the best way with the food cost part was, and I had no idea how horrible the amount of food waste was in the United States, but by working with grocery excess, and when people hear food waste and grocery excess, they think of the films they see of food getting dumped into a landfill. And the reality is, man, like, there are 40% of all food produced in the United States ends up in a landfill pre-consumer. So before it even gets to the consumer, 40% of all food ends up in a landfill. And I said, that's crazy. And the idea kept evolving. We were originally going to do it out of Charlie's and start up with a food truck, eventually open it up to some brick and mortars throughout town, hitting in particularly food deserts, and then eventually build a commissary kitchen. And then COVID hit, and we immediately saw the need. So Reach Dane, which is the local Head Start parent company, reached out to us and they said, hey, we've got 600 kids who all have no food right now because we were gonna be their food support. Can you help us? And we ended up putting out, I think it was 34,000 meals in 9 weeks, all out of Charlie's Kitchen, which sucked. It was horrible, it was so much work, but we got it done. Amazing volunteers, amazing staff, amazing delivery. We delivered all of the meals to the kids in person with our volunteers. And what we really saw is we saw how big a need there is to help with food insecurity in particular. And doing it neighborhood by neighborhood in one little food truck was just never gonna help. We got 26% of people in Dane County are experiencing food insecurity, and that was before COVID. And so who knows what that number is gonna look like in a year. And so our thing was, hey, we've got to make a big change right now. So we're just moving in. I wish I could tell you because I signed the lease next week, but we're moving into a 25,000 square foot building.
Wow. We're
putting a 6,000 square foot commissary kitchen in. We're gonna have 120 gallon steam jacketed kettles, 80 gallon tilt skillets, all this huge cooking equipment to basically centralize our food production and food cooking for all the food insecurity places throughout Dane County. So we're still planning on having our Pay What You Can restaurant in the front of the building. And maybe someday we'll open up other restaurants, but really now our whole goal is shifted to, we're still throwing out so much food. And in fact, we're throwing out even more food right now because people are hyper worried about any kind of sanitation, any kind of food, anything, any kind of touch. And grocery stores just have no idea what's coming in the door. Sometimes if there's a scare about, there's not going to be any more ground beef, then they're like sold out of ground beef.
Yeah.
And then the next week they order, triple the amount of ground beef they would, but then everyone's freezers are full, and now you've got a bunch of ground beef going bad.
The supply chains have not been able to adjust as quickly as restaurants have, and we've got a truck coming through each week, and I am just astounded. And hearing you talk about the numbers even more, to be able to create meals from the excess food, we take what we can, but there's still, to hear about how much food there actually is that's going to waste, that continues to escalate. It's really astounding knowing that so many people aren't able to access meals right now.
And part of it too is that the whole system we have right now is so non-functional. You have 20 different nonprofits all trying to do the same job. They're all showing up to grocery stores. They're all picking through the bags of things. Yeah. The grocery stores are frustrated because they have to basically have someone on staff to try and coordinate all of it. And you never know what you're gonna get. Like, you may show up needing real meals for people and you may get 13 bags of different pastries. Yeah. And you look, so
I think we made a banana mole the other day because I'd never seen that many bananas in the restaurant before, but that's what we got.
Well, I think one of the things that's really tough is I think when you say the words food insecurity, people think of skinny people. And the reality is that food insecurity looks like obesity. So if you look at a majority of our poorer neighborhoods and whatnot, you won't see a bunch of skinny kids. You'll see a bunch of kids who are dealing with diabetes, heart disease, and obesity. And those are the three biggest causes of mortality besides other things we won't have to go into. But those are the three biggest natural caused deaths in those communities. And that every single one of those is food security related. And if you look at the food that people are able to afford, if your average income per meal, if your average cost per meal is $2.18 per person, the only food you can afford to feed your family is going to be high carbohydrate, low vegetable, low protein, low fat. And that leads to all those things we just talked about. So our main goal with Little John's is to say, hey, the number one thing that's getting thrown out in food waste are all those things we mentioned. Like when we go and we do a pickup from a grocery store, we'll have 2 grocery carts from one store full of eggs. And you think about like protein, fat, and healthy, nutritious protein and fat. You look at all the produce that's thrown out, that's perfectly good. There's nothing wrong with it. There's not even a dent or a bruise. And it's just getting tossed, and just because we're really picky consumers. So for us now with Little John's to be able to really take all of that excess and really make a difference and help feed people is we're pretty pumped.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, centralizing that, but also we're still reacting, right? I mean, there are ways that we can make some of these structural changes and be proactive about it, but it's going to come from changes in government policy. But I think the beauty of the service industry really is that we can make it work with what we have kind of thrown at us, but to continue to be reactive, to help our communities and to help our employees and our places of work, it's got to be a collaborative approach of being both reactive and proactive from different sectors.
Yeah. Ashley, you do a lot of work with chefs and people in the industry to try to find their voice around these kinds of issues that they're really passionate about. I wonder how some of that advocacy work that you do has changed or been affected by COVID-19 and Black Lives Matter.
For sure, yeah. So I focus largely on policy and advocacy, so really the policy portion of it. But it really, it's changed a bit. People are not traveling to Washington, D.C. anymore to sit in their congressperson's office to have a conversation about Magnuson Stevens and protecting U.S. fisheries. That's not happening right now. But they are having, conversations on Zoom. They're still talking to their, senators' staffers, ideally, sometimes they're senators too. They're still having these conversations. So one of the things that we try to train chefs is really using the tools. We invite them to really focus in on the issue that they're most passionate about, whatever that might be. But it's really about having the tools at your disposal, knowing who your networks are, because so many chefs and restaurants, they're really hubs of their communities. So, your congressperson might stop in sometimes, their staffers, the mayor's office, the city council members, all these folks are stopping into your restaurant or are, attending your local places of worship, are, visiting the same spots, going to the same grocery stores. So there are these networks that exist, but I think we just forget to map them. We forget to take them into consideration. So often we are closer to decision makers and policy makers than we originally, might think on the surface. And so then it's really about kind of refining your message and what that message is about. And, I will say that with COVID, a lot of message refining has happened. I think more and more chefs and restaurants, if they were not interested in policy before, they are now, because it's a matter of survival now for a lot of folks. And so whether it's looking for pandemic EBT support, supporting SNAP and supporting emergency EBT, or otherwise known as food stamps, that's really important because as we talked about kind of earlier on this panel, like food insecurity is very real all the time, and it's very real right now. So supporting SNAP in your community, supporting the Restaurants Act, whatever that might be, from a policy perspective. But then it's also using those same tools about kind of refining and honing in your message can also be used even if you're not advocating for policy. And though that's my specialty, obviously there are 100 other things, millions of other things people want to advocate for. You can still be doing that when you're demanding equity from the service industry, from the food system, and from society at large. It's really been about honing in on that message and figuring out how to get to the people who are really making the decisions, whatever that might look like.
Yeah, thank you. Francesca, you have done some work around mental health access and access to healthcare in the past couple of years. I wonder if you can talk about the changes you'd like to see in the industry around access to mental health care.
Yeah, I think with so many of the social injustices and the movement that we're a part of right now, it's important to continue to have conversation and bring visibility to these conversations. And when it comes to mental health, it's important to prioritize it with physical health, that the two are inherently linked, that like food and politics, I think mental health and physical health are connected. And having the conversation and having folks in leadership positions and folks who are leading kitchens and restaurants to be transparent about the need for mental health access is a good first step. Because really, again, I'm going to center storytelling. I think being transparent about mental health struggles is really a way for folks to become more open about talking about it and then seeking out resources. I would love, and I see things popping up across the country when it comes to peer support circles, that mental health doesn't have to look like just one way. The needs are very diverse, and so we have to address them in a diverse way as well. Some folks may not have access to a psychiatrist, but there are other resources and communities that are available. Some folks might not feel comfortable calling a national hotline or a suicide line, but here in Wisconsin, we have several different warm lines, which are essentially folks who are trained in peer support that you can call and just talk to someone else about what might be going on, and they can help navigate those resources, because it can be very overwhelming to figure out what your needs might be. And the service industry, again, due to part of like our not being very sustainable and having high turnover and being places of joy, but they're also places of very high stress. There's a lot of emotional labor that folks in the industry have to incur. And so addressing that, really bringing that to the forefront of the conversation and providing these laborers with options that don't just look all the same is important. And I think, again, I'm gonna come back to emotional labor, because being in service means that you're constantly caring for someone else, and if you don't care for yourself, you really cannot provide that care. So our sustainability in the industry really, a lot of it hinges on making sure that we're taking care of our laborers.
Yeah. So before we got officially started today, we were talking a little bit about the state of the industry. As we start to wrap up here, Dave, first to you, I wonder if you can maybe speak to what the main thing is that you wish diners knew right now, or that you want diners to know. You've been pretty public with some of the challenges with Charlie's this week, but are there things that you wish that diners knew right now?
Oh yeah, so many things. So let's, we have another full hour, right? No? Okay. No, I think the number one thing is, I think one of the things that I've seen very clearly is, ever since we announced Charlie's closing, we have had literally hundreds and thousands of people message and comment and say, oh my gosh, it's my favorite restaurant and I'm so sad and I love the speakeasy and we love what Dave does in the community, and it's so sad that this is happening. But at the same time, we went from $20-some thousand a week in sales to $2,000 to $3,000 a week in sales. So I would say that even if you're feeling burnt out, pick just 3 restaurants. This is my challenge for you. Pick 3 restaurants that you want to be here in 2021 and just support them. Just go out. And if it means that instead of eating out 5 times a week, but you're supporting some bigger chain restaurants, just cut back a couple times, buy a couple boxes of Kraft mac and cheese if it's a budget thing, and eat those on the off days. And just 3 days a week, just go out and support those restaurants, because the reality is, man, in talking to all of my chef friends downtown, there is not one locally owned, farm-supporting restaurant that I know that is doing great right now. In fact, I don't even think I know one of them that is doing well right now. In fact, I don't even know one of them that's hanging in there right now. I mean, we are all of us are struggling, and I think there's a lot of it. You talk about mental health. I think there's a lot of it where people are worried about projecting their weaknesses. I think they're worried about projecting that they're scared. I think a lot of people are terrified that they have no idea. I mean, I think you can definitely relate. We are so good at reacting. A small restaurant is so good at reacting. We are incredible at it. And there is no way to maneuver in this pandemic. It's not just like the recession where like kind of slowly overnight we noticed people were spending less. You know, we opened a fine dining restaurant in 2007, and then 2009 hit, and we were like, oh, we're not a fine dining restaurant anymore. We're like a family, nice, casual restaurant, and we put po' boys and chips on our restaurant menu, and we lowered the prices, and we decreased the portion sizes, and we were able to maneuver because we saw that what the customer was willing to spend decreased by a little bit. But this is unmaneuverable, you know, like you can't maneuver when people are just not eating out. There's no way to, you can't even get a message across, like even the nom 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 boxes or like all this stuff. I mean, like the I'm forgetting the name, I'm so sorry, but the thing that you guys are doing with the meals.
Oh, Cook It Forward.
The Cook It Forward thing
Mm-hmm.
had so much infinite support for the first, and I'm not saying it doesn't now, but you know, it had so much infinite support for those first like 3 weeks or so. But then everyone's just so burned out, and there's so much media. Every restaurant is putting, we're doing this special now, we're doing this special thing, we're doing a dinner, we're doing anything we can because we're trying to maneuver to be in front of you because that's what we're used to doing. But in doing so, we're also kind of shooting each other in the foot because there's so many things out there. I mean, in my feed yesterday, I had 12 of my restaurant friends who are all doing either a GoFundMe or a special dinner that's more expensive than it would be, or some sort of like gift card promotion to try and get people to support them. I mean, all of that, I saw 20 of them today, man, and I was only scrolling for like 8 minutes. So, I mean, like, I think that, so I guess to answer your question, to come back to your question about what can consumers do, they can really shop with their dollar and not just with their word. So I guess what I was saying with all those likes and comments is that it's one thing just to say, I love that restaurant and I support it. And this used to happen to me pre-pandemic when people would come up to me and they'd be like, oh my God, you're Chef Dave? And I'm like, yeah, I'm Chef Dave. And they're like, oh my God, Liliana's is my favorite restaurant. I'm like, oh, thanks so much. That means a ton. And I'm like, you know, when's the last time you were in? Oh my God, like 4 years ago, I took my wife. And I'm like, no, I'm not your favorite restaurant. Like, you had a good experience at my restaurant, you know, but I'm not your favorite. Your favorite is the place you go, you know, twice a month or 3 times a month. Once every 5 years, I'm not your favorite restaurant. So go support the places that really are your favorite. Go support them and like do a little bit extra. Do whatever you can, because even though no one's watching what your transactions are, we feel it. You know, every restaurant right now can really feel that you're not supporting us. And it's not just your responsibility. We're out of options and we don't have any government support. I mean, I know you've got, you know, you're mentioning the Restaurant Act that's coming through, but like, you know, like one of my good friends is Mark Pocan. He did magic tricks for me when he was 17 years old in Kenosha. He did magic tricks to raise money for college. And so I've had great conversations with him, but like things are just held up, you know, at the Senate, and there are tons of bills that are trying to get passed and nothing is acting. And so to end on a high note, I'm very excited about what the future could happen if any of the bills get passed.
Okay.
In a passive-aggressive high note.
Okay. Francesca, do you have any thoughts around that, about what you want diners to know right now?
I think diners have an opportunity to be a part of a transformation, a structural industry transformation that I foresee happening between, you know, innovative thinkers like Dave, who are now imagining how we can centralize and address food security from a much larger scope, to, you know, restaurants now more connected to their diners than they realize with so many folks at home looking at their screens. When there is a collective mindset and a desire to struggle with your neighbor, and believe me, like, we know that folks are hurting too, that if they had the funds that they would come out and support restaurants more. You know, the shared struggle is very real, but it also means we have an opportunity to do shared good and shared transformation. And so I would tell diners that we have, you know, we're in a point where there are many more restaurant owners willing to take a stand and speak out about social injustices and what's going on with Black Lives Matter. It's that you have an opportunity to center laborers and workers in the restaurant industry again, that you can work with us on this. And so to see opportunity by supporting your local restaurants is going to make your community stronger, and you have an opportunity to be a part of that. And so, I ask diners to change with us and to be a part of it, and that, you know, there's food along the way.
And Ashley, finally to you, do you have any thoughts about what viewers can do if they're not in politics, they're not the chef or owner of anything, but they want to help create a more sustainable food system? What are some things that diners can do?
Yes. So I feel like I have three things that diners can do to help the service industry survive. One, kind of, as Dave said, eat out. Please support. Just purchase from that independent restaurant in your community, in your neighborhood that is hopefully equitable and people focused. Buy those desserts if you're able to. Buy those beverages. Add those appetizers on. The second would be to be kind when you go to these places, because we are all in this together. So please respect the mask policy. Please tip the service. Remember to wear that mask as you enter and as you leave. And if you get up to use the restroom, and oftentimes servers are put into positions where all of a sudden they're having to do conflict de-escalation, and that is not what they want to do. That is not the job they were trained for, and they'd rather not do that. So please be kind. And finally, as a diner, as a human being, if you are eligible to, please register to vote, please plan your vote, and please vote.
Thank you so much. I just want to thank everybody for being here today. Thank you for this conversation. If you want to know more about the things that we talked about today, you can go to captimes.com. We're going to be writing up all of these wonderful Idea Fest sessions, so there's going to be a lot more there. And I am covering this scene as best I can, as much as I can, and I'm really grateful for everybody here today. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Cap Times Idea Fest 2020 is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors. Presenting sponsor, the Burrish Group at UBS, a financial services firm with global access and a local focus to pursue what matters most for its clients. Major sponsors are HealthX Ventures, backing entrepreneurs who are creating value with digital health solutions. Exact Sciences, pursuing earlier detections and life-changing answers in the fight against cancer. Quartz, health plans built with you in mind. And Madison Gas and Electric, your community energy company whose goal is net zero carbon electricity by 2050. Co-sponsors are Epic Systems and the Godfrey Kahn Law Firm. Other sponsors are Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, Home Savings Bank, Unity Point Health Meritor, Cargo Coffee, and the Forward Theater Company. Media partners are the Wisconsin State Journal and Madison.com, WKOW Channel 27, and Hinckley Productions. Please consider becoming a Cap Times member. Learn more at membership.captimes.com.